Okay, I am now thrilled to welcome on Kendall Kaut of OurDailyBears.com. Kendall covers Baylor basketball, and he has a book coming out on April 20th. That's right?
That is correct.
Called How They Drew It Up, Baylor's Unforgettable 2021 championship season, that goes in depth on this year's Baylor squad and their journey to the national title. It also has a foreword from head coach Scott Drew, and the link to order it will be in my description below. And you can follow him on Twitter at Kendall Kaut. Kendall, did I miss anything you want to promote? Anything you want to share?
That was an excellent job listing what I'd like to list. So thank you very much for that, Bobby.
Okay. All right. So first of all, thanks for coming on. I know you're super busy. I just want to ask you first about the book itself, because it seemed like it had such a quick turnaround. Didn't you announce it right after Baylor won a national championship?
Yep. So the way it all worked out is Triumph Books likes to release a book if any team wins a title in any sport. So they kind of find either a beat writer or somebody who covers the various teams. So about 2 weeks before the title, they hit me up and they're like, you're interested in doing this book? And I'm like, well, maybe, I don't know. There's a lot going on. I don't know how to negotiate really a book. So I don't know if I did this poorly. I don't know if I could have gotten more money from them. I don't really know. But we did that. We kind of got it all done. And so some of it's stuff I wrote during the season for SB Nation and Baylor. Other stuff was stuff I did at the end of the year. So after Baylor won the title, I had to get out stories about that game. And then I had to get out stories for the book. So I was in Lucas Oil Stadium until pretty late into the next day, but all good because they won the title, and that was pretty cool to cover in and of itself.
Yeah. So how was the atmosphere there? I know you tweeted about it a few times. Some games were pretty heavy Baylor fans, I imagine. Other games maybe not. What was the overall environment like? Obviously, it's different than a lot of years in the past.
I thought it was a good environment. My second dose on February 23rd, so I'm pretty much like, let's just get everybody into Lucas Oil Stadium that wants to come in. You could kind of notice that in like the media box, the kind of Baylor media folks, a lot of us had already been vaccinated and we're a little less kind of strict about it. You'd see other people that would come in with N95 masks. And so they'd be the question and answer period. And like Davion Mitchell would be like, can you repeat that? I have no idea what you're saying over that N95. So it was a fun atmosphere overall. I thought the fans who attended the games did a very good job. I know with the pandemic, it's always tough to balance things, but I thought they probably went way too far in the direction of restrictions. I get, some people would say better safe than sorry, but I would say better get a shot and then live your life than anything else. So team vaccine, I think we could have gotten more people into that stadium.
Yes, I totally agree. That's good to know. It's okay. It ended up okay. I want to start off with the Gonzaga game, because I think that game kind of shocked a lot of people. For the record, I was always pro Baylor. Like first day of the season, I tweet out my preseason national champ. I was Baylor all the way. All right. So I was like rooting for you guys the entire season. Okay. I adopt a team every year because I go to Notre Dame. Notre Dame basketball doesn't have the tradition or the experience or the talent. So I pick a team and I just kind of root for them. Baylor's my team this year. But a lot of people were shocked that, they kind of just took it to Gonzaga. What do you think was the overall key in that game and what led to Baylor's just demolition of Gonzaga?
I think that's a great question, Bob. I think there are two things you could focus on. One is just kind of the X's and O's perspective, which I think actually might be secondary. For me, it's as simple as Baylor was just more athletic than Gonzaga. And I didn't know that would actually be the case, right? That Corey Kispert is a lottery pick still for most people. I got a big question about, is Corey Kispert actually a Joe Harris or even a Doug McDermott quality athlete in the NBA with the way that he just could not defend Jared Butler? I mean, there were two sequences, one on offense where Butler just kind of crossed him over and then hit a three in his face. And that second one in the second half where Butler got on him defensively and he just kind of rose up and then dropped down and gave a look like, oh yeah, you can't just go up and down and not get called for a travel. And so I think the athleticism just kind of shocked Gonzaga. That you look at the scheduling, Gonzaga played good teams, but it was very strange that all the good teams they played, Virginia, Iowa, Kansas, all kind of lacked that elite level athleticism this season. And so they played the best schedule you could play without playing an elite level athletic team. And Baylor was certainly an elite level athletic team. And the second thing, and why I think if you got in a debate about this was a best of 7 series, might Gonzaga make it a little more competitive, is Gonzaga did not have a good answer to start with when Baylor elected to front the post. I had talked to Baylor's assistant, John Jacobs, a couple of days before the game. He had been on Gonzaga's staff a couple of years previously. And he felt like this kind of strategy Baylor had when they knocked off KU and Allen Fieldhouse the previous season, where they just fronted Udoka Azubuike, then sent a guy over, often Mark Vital, to double immediately, or Davion Mitchell to double, would give Gonzaga fits, and it sure did. Drew Timme didn't have the space to operate he normally did. And they pressed kind of the ball in the half court so tough. They didn't have those passing lanes they had all season. So I thought Baylor outcoached Gonzaga in that one-game series, and I thought the athleticism was just off the charts for Baylor. And so I think when people look back on that season, that COVID pause really is where the debate will come down on how good is Baylor as a team.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, about that COVID pause. So I remember watching the Iowa State. Well, first of all, I think their last game was against Texas, and that was one of their most impressive games, I think, because they took their lumps. They got down early in the second half, and then they ended up coming back and winning rather handily. And then they go on to COVID pause. They come back. They play Iowa State, look really shaky, and then they lose to Kansas. When were you more worried about Baylor, after the Iowa State win or after the Kansas loss?
I think definitely the Kansas game for me, Bobby. I was in Allen Fieldhouse that day, and Jonathan Chama-Chachua, it was his first game back. He didn't even play the Iowa State game, as I've later found out he had some pretty severe COVID symptoms. I'd heard from multiple sources from the program. And as it related to him, he just looked so bad in that game that I was like, if he's this bad going forward, I don't know what Baylor's going to do, because they probably, Flo Thamba's role all season had been play 15 good minutes, give you 4 fouls, make one nice defensive play. And if you're asking him to play 30, it's like, that's a whole different game. And then they were just making such basic defensive errors. Baylor will often not look at the guy who has the ball. Like, they won't look at the ball. They'll look at reverse, late at night. They will only look at the ball. They will not find their man on the other side of the court. So Baylor can get back cut a lot on defense. Baylor is intently focused on the ball, but there were a lot of sequences in that KU game where Baylor didn't look at the ball. It didn't look at their man, and they were just getting destroyed on these cuts. And I was like, you know what? If they're that bad mentally, and if Jonathan Chama-Chachua looks this bad physically, what in the world are they going to do? Then about a week later, the dude took his shirt off, and it was like, all right, yeah, Jonathan Chama-Chachua could still beat me up even if I fought as dirty as I'd go into that fight thinking I'd have to fight. So that's when I was the most worried, was after that KU game. But I wrote a column after that game saying this could be an experience that makes them better or worse, and sure enough, it made them better.
Yeah, for sure. And then they ended up losing to Oklahoma State, and I know Mark Vital said after that game that they needed that loss too. So do you think there was a little – because, like, I watched Baylor in between the Kansas loss and the Oklahoma State loss, and they were winning games, but they weren't really winning with their defense, I would say. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely, yeah.
So do you think – was that just like a matter of just conditioning and practice, that they just didn't really get that experience and those reps in with COVID, or do you think there was just something more there? And do you ever think they really regained their early February form?
I do. I think they were as good at the end of the season as they were earlier in the campaign. Arkansas played really good offensive basketball. I think that's a reflection that Eric Musselman's just an awesome coach, and they had a really good team. Like, I kind of feel bad. Baylor had been a 3 seed twice in both 2010 and 2012. They lost to eventual national champion Duke and eventual national champion Kentucky. I feel like Arkansas was better than a 3 seed by the end of the season. Like, I think Arkansas would have walloped Michigan had they played them in a 1-3 Elite 8 game. And I think they would have given Illinois the absolute business. I have been on team Illinois was a fraud all season. So when Illinois was coming into the tournament, I was like, get out of here. I was like, these guys are frauds. I don't want to hear about this. That's kind of my hot take there. But I think they had regained that form. They had been saying all along, we haven't practiced. Practice is important. I am kind of the Allen Iverson mindset that, practice, we're talking about practice. These dudes have been on the team for years. What are we talking about? But when they had a practice before their press conference following being announced as the number 2 overall seed, they were just adamant that we'd had such a good practice. We're back. And I was like, well, if they had a bad practice, they're really going to come out and tell everybody, this practice was even worse than it had been before. We shouldn't have even practiced. Good God, take Wisconsin, take North Carolina. We're not making the second weekend. So you were like, well, we're either being spun or they're telling the truth. And I think they were telling the truth now, but if they weren't, we would have been like, oh yeah, they had to lie. It makes sense they would lie. So I didn't know at the time if it was true, but it was true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So on Selection Sunday, the one team I didn't want Baylor to see in their little pod was North Carolina. I was freaking out. North Carolina was playing awesome. They were killing the glass. They beat my Notre Dame Fighting Irish like 101-59. They killed us on the glass. I know you were more worried about Loyola Chicago, and I know you were really like just thrilled that Baylor avoided them. Why did you fear Loyola Chicago more than North Carolina? And was there any other team that you were like worried about Baylor having to play in the early few rounds?
I think it really was just Loyola for me. When that bracket came out, I even said that they would beat Illinois, which I made the joke that focus on that prediction, not the prediction that I rack at WMDs, because I've been very wrong in some much bigger kind of stake predictions that I've made in my lifetime. But for Loyola, it was that they're good. They had made the Final Four just a few years ago. Cameron Krutwig was probably the second best player on that team. Porter Moser's a really good coach. And the way they could operate at the elbow with Krutwig as a big man who could also get to the hoop, I thought was maybe a strategy that could give Baylor some fits. And they didn't probably have the athleticism to match up with Baylor. But the way they just dominated Illinois by working at the elbow, I thought was maybe a path to beating Baylor and would have been a unique challenge for them. And then they were number 10 in Ken Pom. And I was just like, there's something to them being this good and just mollywalloping all these teams in the Missouri Valley. So that's why I was scared. Then for North Carolina, Wisconsin, North Carolina, obviously their offensive rebounding compared to Baylor's defensive rebounding presented a challenge. But I was always just on team. Baylor was so mediocre to god awful at times defensive rebounding wise. It didn't matter how good you were offensive rebounding wise. It was almost like wasting a skill. Like it would be like, I don't mean to be ableist by this example, but I'm just going to give the example with not being ableist, but it would be like if you were the most attractive person in the world dating somebody blind, well, you probably wouldn't want to make yourself even more attractive because the blind person may not care. I don't know. There's a Seinfeld where actually the blind person gets mad to find out the person's not a model. Or maybe it's, or I don't know. I'm confusing my blindness and my ableism here. But I just like that with Baylor, that you were wasting your ability if you were a good offensive rebounding team against Baylor, because anybody could get some offensive rebounds against Baylor. What you really needed to be against Baylor was a team that could either hit shots or have a big man that was skilled and athletic. And then ultimately you start being like, well, you need guards that are athletic and can make some shots and big men that can operate in space. Then you have to be really good on defense, really good on offense. You're ultimately left with, if you're just good at everything in basketball, you got a shot against Baylor. And teams in the tournament didn't end up being great at everything. And so Baylor took advantage.
Mm-hmm. Was there any aspect or like heading into the season or maybe later on in the year that like in terms of roster composition that maybe worried you heading into the tournament? Did you signify like a certain weakness that they might have had and could have been exploited? I know you touched on it a little bit in the last answer, but was there anything roster wise that you were worried about?
I think a little bit it would be that Baylor's front court is probably not, certainly it's not the level of the backcourt. I think there's an argument Baylor has one of the best backcourts of all time. And certainly at least since I think 2005 Illinois, this was the best backcourt. So the front court was not quite at that level. Mark Vidal's really good, but he's 6'4", 6'5". Jonathan Chama-Chacha was 6'8". And then Flo Thamba is not the most agile of big men. So there was a concern that if you had mobile big men, sort of what Villanova could do, you could beat Baylor. I think if Villanova had Colin Gillespie and then maybe one more guy, they might have been able to beat Baylor. But if you give that hypothetical, you're like, well, yeah, Villanova, the preseason number 3 team, if they'd had those tools, would have maybe won the national. Robinson Earl. So that kind of framework, if you had mobile big men like they have with Jermaine Samuels and Jeremiah Robinson Earl, and then guards. In that game, it just turned out that Chris Arcidiacono was not quite the guard you would need to deal with the pressure of Davion Mitchell and Jared Butler.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so how worried were you scale of 1 to 10 when Baylor went down 7 at half?
I was probably a 7.
Really?
Yep, because Baylor had shot so poorly in that game. I just have to get things turned around shooting wise. And then when they came out and find a way to get to the hoop without any ability to shoot that game, that kind of told me, all right, this team is for real. They're good to go. There's always that one game in the tournament where any national champion will shoot poorly. I always give the example of Kansas and how they've lost kind of in a trolling manner because I got a lot of KU friends, but whether it's VCU, Northern Iowa, Oregon, KU has those games every tournament, it seems like. In almost every tournament, they can't overcome them. And that's kind of what happens. And that was what I was fearful for Baylor. I was like, geez, they're 3 of 19 from 3 against a team that was number 3. Is this the day it all ends? And for them to win that game, I thought showed that I felt like from there, I was like, okay, I think they might be able to do this.
Can you take me through Baylor's defensive scheme? So I don't know if you know who Jordan Sperber is, Hoop Vision. I think last season he made a video on Baylor's no middle defense and how it kind of just like revolutionized their entire program. They became like a top 5 defensive team the last 2 seasons. What led to that change from Scott Drew and the coaching staff? And then how do you think that compared to what Baylor ran before the no middle?
I know him a little bit through Twitter. I would like to meet him one day in person. We occasionally will exchange messages on Twitter. There have been different versions of this story told by different people at different times. So you will hear different versions. So this is kind of the most complete version I could give to you, but sometimes you will hear slightly different versions. And so it's sort of like an oral history tradition where it's passed down over the years and then it's slightly different from everybody else you don't know. But this is kind of the most accurate one I can get piecing together different things. After Baylor lost in the 2019 NCAA tournament, they looked at their roster the next season with Davion Mitchell getting eligible as one of the lockdown defenders. And they kind of looked at that summer about should they make a change, seeing how successful Texas Tech had been running that no middle scheme. They had run some zone earlier in that season. My understanding is that they had taken kind of a poll among the assistant coaches about, do you think we should switch to this no middle man-to-man defense that's very aggressive? Davion Mitchell wanted to switch to it. Mark Vidal wanted to switch to it. And ultimately they voted and made that switch. I had talked with Freddie Gillespie, Jared Butler, Davion Mitchell about kind of these changes. And they all said that early on when they made those changes, because Baylor would switch sometimes a little bit more than Texas Tech would, that it would get so bad when Freddie Gillespie early on would switch on to guards that they were just like, we got to go back to the zone. This isn't working out. Again, that might be hyperbole after the fact and how it was so successful, especially last season. But they made that switch because they felt like the personnel would be better for it. And zone didn't work out quite as well because they weren't as long as they had been in the Quincy Miller, Anthony Jones, Quincy AC era. So they felt like a little less length, more athleticism, time to make a change.
So do you think they're going to go? So next year, I'm not 100% sure about their roster composition. I'm assuming their four main starters are gone. I think Mark Vital announced he's out of there today. Davion Mitchell's gone. And I assume Teague and Butler will follow. So do you think Scott Drew will shift back to what he was doing before no middle, or do you think this type of scheme is here to stay?
Great question. I would be very surprised if they went back to the zone. My expectation is they will switch, or they will stick with some form of the no middle, but they might be a little less aggressive in forcing everything to the middle. My hope is that I can get down there sometime this summer and just attend kind of 3 straight days of practice to see what they're doing. Because one thing Jordan Sperber said, I think a year ago, was that if you have Davion Mitchell and Mark Vital in any defensive system, it can look pretty good. And so it might turn out that one thing that was always great about Davion Mitchell is the no middle system. You kind of are parallel at times to let the guy drive baseline. And then Davion literally could recover and still stop the guy face up, even giving you half a step. Well, next year, Baylor may not have the lead guards that, although I think LJ Cryer and Adam Flagler are very good, they're not quite as good as Davion Mitchell because he won National Defensive Player of the Year from every organization. So I think they'll run the no middle scheme still, but I might expect a little bit of tweak. But who knows? They might come out in zone and I look like an idiot for that answer.
And then I want to shift over to the offensive side of the ball. When I watched Baylor, I'm not like an X's and O's guru here, but when I watched Baylor, all I saw was that Jared Butler, Maceo Teague, Davion Mitchell, they could just get any shot anytime they wanted. And a lot of it was isolation heavy. And that was a little bit of a concern for me just because I didn't know like how like reliable that isolation scoring could be into the tournament. Obviously it was very reliable. Was that all there was to the Baylor offense, just letting the guards just kind of do their thing? Or was there something more that I'm just missing here?
Yeah, so Baylor used to be a team that ran continuity ball screen offense in the era of like Jonathan Motley, Rico Gathers. When Tristan Clark got injured in the 2019 season, they switched to running an offense that was just like get Tristan Clark the ball and then just space out. And if Tristan gets doubled, you hit a 3. And if not, that's about it. Like there was more complexity than that, but it was really heavily focused on Tristan Clark. After he got injured, Baylor switched to an offense that was kind of 4 out. With Mark Vital would play, it wasn't quite 4 out, but that was kind of the focus. And so Baylor ran a variety of different offensive plays and different offensive schemes, but ultimately they ran a lot of just middle pick and rolls. They upped those by about 5% in the tournament. And they ran a lot of dribble weave offenses. And Baylor's main strategy by the end of the season, as you had mentioned, Bobby, was just run enough of a scheme, get one of those guards switched on to somebody that can't defend them, and then have them go to work. And then if they miss the shot, Mark Vital will grab an offensive rebound and repeat. And that was a pretty effective offense because, Baylor could have run, I think, more complex stuff at times, and they thought about doing that, but it just wasn't necessary. I know they had a lot of plays they were prepared to run with Mark Vital if people had gone to more of that trapping system defensively, but Baylor got up so much just running the normal stuff, they didn't ultimately have to go to some of that stuff.
Mm-hmm. And I remember, I think Arkansas tried to trap out of ball screens a little bit, and Baylor just eviscerated them. I think it was a 4-on-3 every single time, and then that was just like the end of it. It ended in a layup or a dunk. I'm trying to think. So the thing that stood out with me about Baylor was just how they never seemed to get rattled. So I just kind of want to ask you, what was like the psychology of the team? Like, were they just like, I don't want to be like a meme here, but like, were they just like built different? Like, were they just unfazed? Who were the leaders in the huddle? Who was getting them through those tough times?
I think the good thing about Baylor, it's like, if you win in retrospect, you will always say that it's leadership or it's the collective will of the guys. But I do actually think that's true in this case, that I think they were great individually. Like if you add Jared Butler to Kansas, I think that's a 1 seed. You add Davion Mitchell to West Virginia, I think that they are a 1 seed and they're playing in the Elite Eight at least. But I think the collective sum was greater than the individual parts with what they were able to achieve. Because I think that, to me, the best relationship on the team that worked is that Davion Mitchell and Jared Butler did not go to war with each other. I gave this analogy when I was on the Big 12 Today with Holly Rowe and Gabe Eichert. But Bobby, did you ever watch The Wire?
The Wire? I didn't know. Everybody recommended it to me. I know. I've only watched like 6 TV shows, and The Wire just hasn't really made my list yet. I definitely got to check it out though.
Okay, it's very fair. Then I won't give that analogy, but I think one thing that a lot of weaker teams could have done is that at various points in the season, it was very clear Jared Butler was the best player. Then in the first 64, 32, 16, 8 games in the tournament, the first 4 rounds, I had to count how many games are there in the tournament. Those first 4 games in the tournament, clearly Davion Mitchell was Baylor's best player. Mm-hmm. And Jared Butler not to sulk about this or get upset about it, or for Davion not to make the biggest deal in the world like my team now. And then in the Final Four, I thought Jared Butler was very clearly Baylor's best player. I voted Davion Mitchell the most outstanding player of the South region, voted Jared Butler the most outstanding player of the Final Four. But that is a good team where there is not that internal strife when you have 2 players that great fighting with one another that I think will both be first-round picks. that I think speaks to the talent of the team. And then when Teague has struggled a little bit early, he didn't get too down on himself. He just kept playing hard. When Mark Vidal wasn't playing as well early, he didn't get too down on himself. My favorite Mark Vidal story is that after the KU game, Fran Fraschilla from ESPN had tweeted out, like, is Mark Vidal a little heavy? I don't know what's going on. And Mark, like, saw that tweet. I asked him after the game. I was like, Mark, there's been some stuff said. What do you have to say? And he's like, yeah, man, I know what you're referencing, that Fran tweet. He's like, I'm still the same guy. I'm still the villain. I'm not heavy, nothing like that. And then it was really cool. Before the Elite Eight, I talked to Mark for about an hour when he was in the bubble. I was not inside the bubble. We were doing the Zoom live. And I was like, yeah, Mark, kind of what's the season been like? And he's like, man, I'm not going to lie to you. I've definitely been about 20 pounds too heavy all season. So all season he was like, I'm not overweight. I'm not too big. And then once they got deep in the tournament, he was like, yeah, look, I'm not going to lie. I'm a little heavy. I just lose some weight. And so that's what's just cool about Mark, is that Mark can go from like one thing to the other. And then once it works out for him, he can just laugh about it and be like, yeah, I mean, look, I could have lost some weight. I could have done this. I probably was a little crazy there, but I knew Scott Drew probably put Fran up to this, but it got me going. It motivated me. And I just like kind of that whole demeanor of the team and how they worked so well together.
Mm-hmm. And then I think, was that the press conference where Mark Vidal wore the glue guy sweatshirt too? Was that the same one?
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm. That was a very iconic press conference. And I actually want to mention this with the press conferences, because I watched like every Baylor one. Every single time Jared Butler was up there, it would be like, oh yeah, now from our Daily Bears, Kendall Kaut. And then Jared would be like, Kendall, right? Like what was going on there? Like, is that just like a joke between you guys, or?
Sure. So I had interviewed him after his freshman year for about an hour, and we had just like a really in-depth basketball conversation. His freshman season, the thing that like really impressed me about Jared that year is that I have never seen a man who took more advantage of the carry rule in basketball. Like, if you watch freshman year Jared Butler, it was like his hand. I thought every time he was done dribbling. And if I were a rival coach, I would have just been screaming on the sideline, this is a carry. You can't stop this man if he's allowed to get away with this. But it wasn't. Like, he would just stop it perfectly and go back. And so we'd go over all these clips and I'd be like, man, how's that not a carry here? How do you just stop in time? And I think he really respected that we just went over that in depth, and we just talked a lot of X's and O's in ball that year. And I was like, man, I think you can be really good at basketball. Here's why. And then that sophomore year, he had a great year. We talked forever after that and his decision. So I think it was just kind of like, we really talked a lot about just the X's and O's, what was going on with basketball, why would it work out. And from his freshman year, when they were a 9 seed and got bounced in the second round, I was just like, no, I really think these dudes are for real. And if they'd been phony, maybe he would have been like, okay, this guy didn't really know what he was talking about. But I was like, no, I think these dudes are for real. Like, I've watched a lot of mediocre basketball teams, not as many at Baylor, but I've watched some mediocre basketball teams, and I've watched a lot of bad football at various times. And I was like, no, I think these dudes are for real. I think we just kind of connected into that thing.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool. I'm trying to think what else. So heading into this season, I think Maceo and Jared both tested the NBA draft waters. How close do you think either of them were to actually leaving Baylor and going to the NBA, and then what ultimately brought them back, in your opinion?
I'm not definitive on how close Maceo got to it. I did interview him for about 45 minutes, but I'm not as close with his side of the family. I'm not close with his side of the family. Doesn't mean I don't like him. I don't have connections with his side of the family to really know. But I think he probably thought about it because he had taken a gap year where he went to a prep school. But ultimately, I think he elected to come back because he wasn't going to get drafted. And he knew he could win a national championship, and he does like school. For Jared, I know it was very close for him as a decision. He had told me there were weeks that he thought he was going to go pro and not come back. There were other weeks he thought he was going to return to school. I had dinner with his parents when we were in Indianapolis and a couple other people I know. We didn't really talk much about the NBA draft, but the thing that works out for Jared, and I'm not saying this doesn't work out for other guys in the team, but his parents are just very well put together folks, where his dad's an engineer, his mom's a teacher. And so it was kind of like Jared didn't have to go to the NBA right away and make money. Like, Quincy Miller had gone to Baylor, and he has like 13 brothers and sisters. And so even though Quincy Miller had announced he was going to return to Baylor after his freshman year and then decided to go pro, it was like, well, the guy's got a lot of people that need some help for him. But with Jared, it's like, no, like, everyone in his family is very successful. Like, I think he's got a sister who's getting like a master's somewhere. He's got another older brother who's very successful. So with Jared, I think it was very close. I think ultimately what brought him back is that because the draft that year had so many guys who played guard, he felt like he was going to be probably a second-round pick. And then he thought that he could win a national championship. So I think those two things were enough to pull him back ultimately. But I think he met with somewhere between like 22 and 24 NBA teams. He just didn't feel like he was definitively going to be a first-round pick. And so with the advantages Baylor had, it was worthwhile to return.
Mm-hmm. And then obviously this team was pretty much built on transfers. Jared Butler, obviously, he never played at Alabama, but he was enrolled there. And then you got Maceo, Davion, Jonathan Shama-Chachua. Was that always an approach for Scott Drew? I'm not really familiar with what he did before the last 2 seasons. But was the transfer portal or just trying to recruit transfers? Was that always like kind of a staple of his program, or was that something that he kind of embraced later on?
It was embraced later on, and that's, I think, the best claim you can make for why Scott Drew should be viewed as a top 5 coach in the sport is that he has adapted very well. Early Scott Drew was land McDonald's All-Americans, recruit very well, and then just try and throw the pieces together with some older dudes and make it work out. I think that is still ultimately the most successful way to win most seasons. You will win more often than not if you can land 5-star guys, then mix and mold them. You will have the down years like Duke had this year and Kentucky had this year and in 2013. But ultimately, I think that's what they would like to do at Baylor. But they had a fallback plan. That fallback plan was land these guys. The funniest thing in the world is that Tyler Harris, who had been at Memphis and then Iowa State and is now transferring again, was going to be Baylor's point guard, and Davion Mitchell was not going to come to Baylor. Baylor wanted Tyler Harris because they thought he was going to be better than Davion Mitchell. And then Tyler Harris ultimately likes to go to Memphis, and so Baylor needs to get Davion Mitchell, and he commits the next day. Like Davion Mitchell's uncle has said on the Sick 365 podcast on the Baylor site, he mentioned this, and I can verify this as well, but he was not coming to Baylor if Tyler Harris had gone there. So that was Baylor's backup plan. But the reason those backup plans work, I think, is that Baylor builds very good relationships with their recruits. So Davion Mitchell thought about Baylor, ultimately didn't pick Baylor, but still respected and liked the coaches, so he was able to go there. Jared Butler picks Alabama. I think that Baylor was probably his second/third choice. I know he really liked Virginia too, but I think his parents were kind of like, hey, this may not be the most successful path to getting you into the NBA. But he still had a pretty good relationship with the Baylor coaches, even though he felt like they didn't recruit him hard enough until late in the game. But it's the way they built those relationships that allowed them to have the backup options, but it was not the forefront. Their forefront strategy had been land the 5-star kids. And when they didn't land the 5 stars, they had a backup plan. But I think going forward, they're very open to this strategy. But I think what they want to have are people that have pretty good family role models in their life. They're going to get transfers, so when they get in the program, they'll do well. That doesn't mean if there are people that come from family structures that aren't great or that they have problems in their family structures, they won't take them. But it means they're probably going to give those folks at least a second look. Maybe they'd be a little more nervous about taking guys that haven't had that kind of stability long term because they want the culture of the program to remain strong going forward.
Mm-hmm. Who do you think was the most – so of like the core 8 guys, who do you think was the most if you asked them senior year of high school, who was the most unlikely to come to Baylor?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think certainly Jonathan Tchamwa-Tchatchoua. He started at UNLV would be kind of the easy one, but I think to kind of and then Maceo Teague, given he had to go to prep school and then played at UNC Asheville, would be the other one. I think of the guys that they recruited and landed, it probably would actually be Jared Butler at first, just because Baylor got in the game late and he really liked Avery Johnson and felt like he was at Alabama, and then he'd had pretty good relationships, I think, with Tony Bennett in Virginia. So I think Baylor was not in the best spot with Jared Butler at first, but they were able to ultimately get his services. So I think that would probably be the number one guy on kind of that list of those dudes.
Mm-hmm. And then, so I'm just trying to think of so 2015 was the year you guys lost to Georgia State, right? The RJ Hunter shot. 2016, Taurean Prince, you grabbed the ball, rebound against Yale. Was there ever a moment in Scott Drew's tenure where you were wavering in terms of confidence in him, or were you always just fully on the Scott Drew train? Because I feel like that's been a conversation a little bit, obviously not now, but like maybe in the mid 2010s or maybe earlier than that. So was there ever a moment where you were wavering?
Great question, Bobby. I was always on he will be good. We have a guy who writes for our site named Dex who drew kind of some ire from a lot of people for saying that it was time for Scott Drew to go because he didn't think he was going to be successful. I thought he would ultimately win, because I thought he could get Baylor at least back to a top 20 level. He's even exceeded the expectations I had for him in short order, though I did say before the season I thought they would win the title. But if you would ask me in like 2019, will Baylor win the 2021 title? I would have probably said, no, I don't think so. Maybe 2022 or 2023. I didn't know that Maceo Teague would be quite this good, or that Davion Mitchell's shot would develop this well, but I knew his defense would be good. But I didn't waver, but I think there were points where it really could have gone wrong if something had not worked out. And the one I focused on is in 2014, Baylor started 2-8 in Big 12 play. But to even get to 2-8, they beat a Marcus Smart Oklahoma State team in Stillwater. And for that game, their starting point guard, Kenny Cherry, was out with plantar fasciitis. So their backup point guard, Gary Franklin, played like 37 minutes and hit like 5 threes in the second half. And if they don't win that game 72-67, then they maybe start 1-9 in Big 12 play. And they had some really good players in that team. Isaiah Austin, a 5-star talent, Corey Jefferson, a good senior. Brady Hessett was on that team too. I think that team might have self-combusted if they don't win that game. So I've always said Gary Franklin is the most underrated guy of all time. And I think that was the same day that Denver was getting absolutely torched by Seattle in the Super Bowl. But that was the day that I think really changed the whole trajectory of Baylor basketball. And so I think if you could pick one random butterfly effect guy, Gary Franklin is the guy that should never have to buy beer in Waco.
Mm-hmm. I feel bad asking this question because I'm sure you hear it a lot. But Scott Drew's a Baylor lifer, right? He's not going anywhere. Do you think he would ever consider leaving Baylor for somewhere else?
I don't know. That's always a great question because I'm kind of of two minds about this. The first is that I think it would take a very good offer for him to leave. The second one is that I think no one really knows what they will do until they're presented with that opportunity. Scott Drew is a great family man, so I'm not giving this analogy to be like saying Scott Drew like this. But if it were me, I am not married. But you can understand why if I were married to somebody and then Brad Pitt or all the people I can think of that are famous are older now, but let's say, I'm 50 and I'm married and I've been married a while, then Matthew McConaughey comes calling for my wife. I could understand if my wife left me for Matthew McConaughey, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's where you are if you're Baylor right now. You could say, well, look, if North Carolina came open and decided they didn't want to give the job to the family, or Duke came open, might he consider leaving? But Arizona came open. I got to assume Arizona would have wanted Scott Drew to be their head coach, and he didn't take that job. And with Baylor getting a new arena, I don't think there's a college job he would leave for. I think the question might be, is there someday in the future where he might just want the challenge of coaching in the NBA? He's such a good guy that I think the thing that would work well for him in the NBA is he would not be a jerk when he got to the league, kind of riding NBA players too hard. So I think they like him personality-wise. But I also think he's such a relentlessly optimistic guy that if you got an NBA team that was like 12-30 and Scott Drew's coming in positive as can be, I do kind of wonder how that would play out. I don't know. That's just kind of my doubt about it. I think he should stay at Baylor. I think he'd win a lot of games there. He has a cult-like following now from winning the national title. I don't know that he'd be happier anywhere else. But, 10 years from now, he might decide somewhere else is where he wants to go and leave there. But, gun to my head in some sick game where I have to have my life determined by this sick, version of does he stay or go. I think Scott Drew will be coaching at Baylor in 2035 and 2040.
Awesome. I will write that down and I will get back to you. In terms of the NBA draft, how do you forecast the careers of Davion, Jared, Mark, and then Maceo?
It's very tough for me to assess this one because I'm kind of very close to some of those guys and I've talked to them for so long that it's tough for me to be like, say anything bad about these guys. I still want to try and be objective about this. I think Davion will go top 10 for sure right now, unless one of these guys gets injured. I think they're all set to go in sort of these range. I think Davion will go top 10. I think he's going to be a star in the NBA because he will, at least in my mind, be Marcus Smart, which is a very good NBA player defensively. That three-point shot is what it has been in the past, and I think he's going to be a perennial all-star. It really just comes down to that three-point shot for Davion and wondering, can he do it? He makes some really deep shots in warm-ups, and the way he makes the off-the-dribble three, I would not bet against Davion Mitchell. As far as Jared Butler, he's slipping a little bit in some draft boards and just not out of the first round, but he's kind of in that mid-20s range, which is kind of surprising to me because I just don't know how in good conscience you could watch the national championship game and think Corey Kispert is the guy that's going to take us to the promised land, but not Jared Butler. When I watch Jared Butler play, I really see a lot more of a Malcolm Brogdon type player, which is a high-level starter who could be an all-star. It will really just come down to me for Jared Butler about is that athleticism to hit that next year. He's dunked for the first time this season. He's also a very young player. He won't turn 21 until August. So there are all these guys like Sharif Cooper, I think is only like 6 months younger than Jared Butler, despite being a freshman. And a lot of people are like, oh, Sharif Cooper, he's, so good. And I'm like, Sharif Cooper's like 5'9". Cooper's not getting swiped right on Bumble with a lot of women with the height he's playing at. So I don't know why he's suddenly going to be an NBA star. So I think he's going to be good. Teague, I think, has to kind of decide, can he change his shooting form? He has a little bit of that elongated shooting form. And so I don't know if an NBA team will take a chance on him until then. If he can change that form, I think he's got a chance to play in the NBA someday. Royce O'Neal, it took him a while to get into the NBA. So I think that might be the path for him. In terms of Mark Vidal, the question will be, what does he measure in at the combine? I don't know that he's going to measure in at 6'5" or 6'6", which might be kind of the difference for him. And then he's got to add that three-point shot. There are people that say in practice he makes a lot of them. He didn't make them in the games. I love Mark Vidal as a person. I root for him, overwhelmingly. I don't know who Mark Vidal is and how close he is with his family and his friends. If he's one of those guys that's really going to love being in Europe for 15 years, but he is one hell of a personality. So if he gets over there and makes some friends, he could really succeed there. But he also loves his family. So I don't know. We could wake up in 10 years and Mark Vidal is the second tight end on the Cowboys for a decade, or he could be an assistant coach somewhere, or he could be the 15th guy in the NBA, or he could be in the G League, or he could be in Europe. He's the toughest one for me to predict, and I can't really give a prediction there. But I can say that if Davion Mitchell is not a starter in the NBA in 2030, I will be absolutely shocked. If Jared Butler is not still in the NBA, it would take like an injury or some kind of medical thing for one of those guys not to be in the league for me. But I think both those guys will be in the NBA for a long time.
All right, last question, then I'll get you out of here. From your book, or just from covering this team in general, what's your favorite? What was your favorite behind the scenes story to listen to or to report on?
That's a very good question. I want to sift through some for a second and be like, okay, I think the funniest one for me, which is not kind of an X's and O's or basketball one that I had mentioned, is when the protests were going on nationwide. They had a really in-depth kind of animated discussion about race in America. What do we need to do? What should we be doing? Should we be protesting right now? What should we be doing? And it was a heated discussion. And people got animated. People were worked up. That's what should happen, right? There are things we need to change in society. That's great that happened. But toward the end of it, Mark Vidal looked around the room and he was like, I got friends that are every race. Like, I got really good friends that are white people like you, Rim, and I got really good friends that are white people like you. And he was naming people. And then he was like, Austin, I don't even know what race you are, but you're my buddy too. And it was like, Mark, what are we talking about? But somebody told me like the whole room just changed after that because everybody was just so excited because it was just like, that's Mark. That like, discussion just changed. Everybody's like, all right, we're good. We all love each other still. This is great. Everything's good. So but what I'd heard about that was they had a lot of great discussions. They felt like they made positive change and that all worked out. But it was like, Mark was the one when things got so heated. Okay, how do we go back to playing basketball after that? And then when Mark said that, it was like, all right, we can go back to playing basketball again. Mark's got us.
All right, sorry, I forgot one of my questions. This is my last one, though. Promise. Yeah. Okay. Next year's Baylor team, what's your forecast for them? Because I know they got Kendall Brown, Langston Love is another guy too. I think I forget the guy's first name, but Soshan, right? Isn't that something?
Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce that dude's last name because I hear like a different one from every person I talk to.
Yeah, okay. But like they have a good recruiting class coming in. I think Flagler is going to be back. Meyer probably on the fence. I predict he's coming back, but I don't know. He might get, a team to promise him. Where do you think Baylor's team stacks up next year heading into the 2022 tournament?
Giant confidence interval on what Baylor could be next season. Meyer coming back, I think, is certainly the biggest question. I could see him going pro. I could see him returning. There are some people that really think he's coming back. I don't know what he's going to do. I'm going to talk with him and Jackson Moffitt, the Mullet Bros, on Monday. So I'll probably try and be like, no, Matt, what are you thinking? And I'm sure he'll be like, I'd like to come back, but you just got to go through the process. So I probably won't learn anything, but that's a reasonable answer. So if I had to guess, I would say if Meyer returns, I think Baylor could be a top 15 team next year. But that's also one of those deals where Pat Riley talks about the disease of me or the disease of more. And I don't know, will Jonathan Chamachacho come back and be content in his role? Will Matt Meyer be content in his role? Will LJ Cryer and Adam Flagler be content in the role? How good's Kendall Brown? Is he a top 10 pick? All those things are huge question marks. So I felt like Baylor was easily one of the three best teams in the country entering last season. I feel like Baylor might be team 5 next year. They could be team 1 by the end of the year. I could also see Baylor being a 9 seed in the tournament. But I cannot give a ton of confidence, but I've enjoyed being on the show, Bobby, so I will give a direct prediction. I think Baylor will be a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament. I think they will lose in the Sweet 16. That's my prediction. Hopefully they do better than that, but that's if I got to go on the record right now, I think Meyer comes back if they lose in the Sweet 16 after a real good season, though.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I think that's all I got for you. Kendall Kaut, you can get his book, order it online. The link will be in my description below. And yeah, that's all I got. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Best of luck with the book. Best of luck with future endeavors. And I hope to talk to you soon, maybe after next year and Baylor repeats as champions, but we'll see.
Yeah, this was great. I would be happy to be on again, Bobby. Thank you, sir.